Fifth and Long fans, welcome back one more time. Patrick, DeMarre, Paul Kashack here, continuing our division previews for this year's NFL season. We are moving from the AFC East to the NFC East next. Our first team in the NFC East, I did all these by alphabetical order. It's the Dallas Cowboys. We're starting out with last year's NFC East division winner, the number 2 overall seed in the NFC playoffs, although it didn't really mean much. 12-5 record for Dallas last year, but they lost to Green Bay in the first round of the playoffs, the wild card game, 48-32 at home. They were down, 30 points, I think, at one point, or pretty close to it.
They were down so bad.
I think Green Bay scored 4 unanswered touchdowns to start the game, if I remember right.
Yeah, they were down so bad that there might have been a pep talk during the Fox halftime show. One for the Dallas Cowboys. It was bad.
Yeah, I remember that. Wasn't it Terry Bradshaw losing his mind?
No, it was Jimmy Johnson, I believe.
Yeah, it was Jimmy Johnson. You're right.
Yeah.
The former Cowboys head coach, screaming at the TV at the Cowboys players, basically during the halftime.
That's how bad it was. I don't remember what their biggest deficit was, but it was so bad that he felt the need on national television to give a cringeworthy pep talk to the Dallas Cowboys.
That's pretty brutal. It was certainly a rough end of the season, just based on how good the Cowboys looked at times. There were times where you and I had them as one of the best teams in the league. I think one of the weeks before the season ended, I put them as my top team. Dak finished as the runner-up for MVP, but looking back on it, he very well could have and maybe should have won the MVP last season instead of Lamar Jackson. When I'm looking at the makeup of the Cowboys this year, I don't know. It's tough to say. I feel like it's kind of like the Patriots situation where teams love to hate on the Cowboys. They love how they lost last year. However, this team has won 12 games each of the last 3 years, and their over-under is only at 9.5. Yes, they lost Jaron Kearse. Yes, they lost Tony Pollard. Yes, they lost Stephon Gilmore, Dorrance Armstrong. Are any of those huge losses? Gilmore, maybe? Pollard wasn't really
Gilmore's
great
good
last
player,
year,
but he's too old, I think, for that to be so significant.
I think the biggest losses were Tyron Smith and Tyler Badass. Biadasz? I don't know how to say it.
Biadasz is how you say it, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Tyron Smith and Tyler Biadasz. Those are the 2 biggest losses for this team. Both on the O-line.
Badass.
I thought that's how you said it. Biadasz.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Tyler Badass. Yeah. I wish it was how you said it. Former defensive coordinator Dan Quinn, no longer with the team. He's now the head coach in Washington, who we'll get to later. CeeDee Lamb emerged as a top wide receiver, not just for this team last year, but in the league. He was already a top receiver for the Cowboys, but really made his claim as one of the handful of best pass catchers in the NFL last season. And now Mike Zimmer is going to take over the reins for the defense. Going to do things a little bit differently. There's been some rumors circulating around Cowboys camp that potentially Micah Parsons could play more of a linebacker role this year, like a stand-up linebacker where he's playing more in coverage a little bit and kind of mixing up how he pressures, which I don't necessarily hate the idea of. He's lighter, supposedly, and is a lot more rangy, and people have said great things about how he is being utilized so far by Zimmer. That gets me really excited, using Parsons as the real focal point of this team. And Zimmer, he was a decent head coach in Minnesota for a while. Those Vikings teams were never terrible by any means. They were always in the hunt. He just kind of ran into the same problem that McCarthy's running into now in Dallas, where eventually they had enough disappointing finishes to where they had to make a change. Eric Kendricks, Zeke Elliott, probably the biggest additions for this team free agency-wise. They also brought in Tyler Guyton and Cooper Beebe through the draft, as well as Marshawn Nealand. All those guys have pretty high reports from scouts. I think folks are the highest on Beebe specifically, but Nealand was a great defender in college as well at Western Michigan, I believe. He's one of the best run defenders in the country per PFF. Paul, 2023 to 2024. Per our friend John Hallway McAuliffe, what do the Cowboys need to happen or change to win the Super Bowl this season? Shout out Hallway, by the way.
Oh shoot, I think it's as simple as you just need to play better in the playoffs. I mean, I wish I had a better answer for you, but I guess Dak Prescott needs to be better in the playoffs. Defense needs to be better. It's interesting you talk about Micah Parsons, using him maybe more as, like a middle linebacker or I guess in pass coverage, so to speak. I really look at him already as like he can do it all. You can kind of, play him in any role to begin with, and to a degree they already do. So I don't know actually how much stock I really put in that, because I think that game situation will kind of dictate what player Micah Parsons needs to be. He's that talented where he can morph into different players. I think the run game needs to be better as well for Dallas. Tony Pollard, very ineffective on the ground. I know he's gone, but Rico Dowdle stepped in and looked pretty decent at times, but this hasn't been the run game that we saw from a few years back with Zeke and like that Zeke Pollard combination. So if they can get a run game that looks more like that, take a little bit of pressure off of Dak's shoulders, I think that that's certainly one thing there. Obviously, you want to get the games at home, but like coaching needs to be better, and just all around when it comes to the situations in prime time. I think there's no doubt Dallas has talent. I don't think that's the problem with them ever, but they've got to live up to the moment as much as anything. So to our buddy Hallway, I wish I could give you a little bit of a better concrete answer and like give you actually something that is different from this year to last year, but I don't. I think it's just internally the Cowboys have to believe that they can and execute. And I think it will start with the run game for one, but ultimately Dak Prescott, Mike McCarthy pulling the right strings come playoff time, come January, not come October, November.
I do think that Zimmer as DC could be a big difference maker for them. The first thing I think about with Dan Quinn is aggressive, kind of over opportunistic defense where you're trying to force those opportunities to get takeaways. Trevon Diggs, Deron Bland, right? Both those guys. And then I think back to the old Falcons defenses as well when they were great when Quinn was at the helm in Atlanta. And I think about, admittedly, as a Patriots fan, the 28-3 Super Bowl where the defense over time and the team over time kind of lost their head, lost their cool, didn't keep their composure. That to me is like Dan Quinn encapsulated. And if he's in charge of your defense and you're giving up 4 unanswered touchdowns to the Green Bay Packers at home in the first round of the playoffs, to me that kind of goes hand in hand. I think that Dallas's defense this year will be just as good, if not better, because they will be more disciplined. And I think even though they'll be more disciplined, they'll still be able to create turnovers just by being good. I think Dak is capable of having another MVP type season. I really do. I think he's one of the 4 or 5 best quarterbacks in the league, maybe 3 or 4 best if he's on his best day. I think CeeDee Lamb is one of the best receivers in the league, and I do resonate with your point about the run game. When Zeke left the team last year and they kind of relied on Pollard as the one back last year, that part of their offense really took a hit. They've also had some losses on the O-line the last couple of years as well. That group isn't really the same as what it used to be. And through the draft, you saw that they're making an effort to try to get back to that. They even brought Zeke back, who has kind of talked about how he thinks he still has some left in the tank. Mike McCarthy has talked up Rico Dowdle, has the number 1 back a good bit. I don't think all 5'5" of Deuce Vaughn is going to be the bell cow by any means. So it's going to be on the shoulders of Pollard, but not of Pollard, of Dowdle and Zeke for sure. And it's going to be on the shoulders of Dak too. He's going to have to be better. Part of that drudging against the Packers in the opening round of the playoffs was the team started out scoreless as well through halftime. Neither side of the ball looked great. I remember the close-ups of Dak and CeeDee with those dejected looks on their faces, and I'm sure for Cowboys fans that has played in their head endlessly on slow-mo in the offseason. I think someone needs to step up as a third passing option. Like CeeDee's there. Jake Ferguson, I think, is a phenomenal tight end and could maybe elevate his play a level this year, but I don't know how much longer they'll be able to rely on Brandon Cooks. After that, the depth chart gets kind of murky. Like, it's names that most people won't recognize, but we do because we're football nerds. I don't know if they have enough depth overall to really get them there. I think they're capable of maybe making it to Super Bowl if everything's goes well, because they do have a lot of talent on both sides of the ball still. But I do think they're a little worse this year than they were last year, and I think it's going to take probably the best season of Dak's career and CD's career to get them over the expectation hump in Dallas, which is win a Super Bowl. And there's a real possibility that they experienced both of those things last season. I don't think it's impossible to repeat those. I don't know. It's hard to rely on that level of production year after year after year for, guys who haven't come through yet when it's mattered the most, really.
So the ceiling floor discussion is your ceiling. Are you saying that their ceiling is Super Bowl, or are you saying something less than that?
So I don't think their ceiling is Super Bowl this year. I think they are a team that's capable of being like in this. Colin Cowherd has a Super Bowl bubble, right, where he names like 6-7 teams that are capable of winning the Super Bowl, and then as the year goes on, he kind of dwindles it down to less teams. I think they're one of the 4 or 5 best teams in the league at their ceiling, and through that, I think you have to say they have a chance to win the Super Bowl. Personally, I think their ceiling is like runner-up in the conference championship. I can't really in good conscience pick them over San Francisco right now. And I think there's even some other NFC teams that could give them issues as well. We saw the Packers do it last year. I think their floor is probably 10-7. The over/under is at 9.5. I don't see them going 9-8, 8-9 with this core. Like, they haven't. I mentioned it when we first brought up this team. They've won 12 games each of the last 3 years. That's pretty consistent. In my mind, they're like the Bills of the NFC, kind of. They've got a great quarterback, pretty good coach, but there's some issues there, and it's different makeups in terms of the overall roster as the team, but in terms of the history recently, kind of similar. I think there's a world where they get to the Super Bowl, but I don't have them winning it this year. No.
I think that the ceiling is going to be what it has been for the Cowboys for basically the last 25 or 30 years, and that's the divisional round of the playoffs. I think that they're good. Like you said, they're super talented, and could they win 11 or 12 games again this year? Sure. But when you keep seeing the same thing over and over again, and these guys that are so talented during the regular season fold and just look like complete shells of themselves in the playoffs, I see no reason to think that the same thing won't happen again. And I don't think it's a foregone conclusion either that even if they do win 11 or 12 games, that they get a home playoff game. Philadelphia is still there. Philadelphia could win the division at 12 or 13, and then the Cowboys got to go on the road and then that first round matchup. So
is there not something to saying, though, that might be an easier path? Like going in as a 5 seed and matching up against like in Atlanta or something like that. Like,
I guess it all depends on who the 4 seed is that you get, but I mean, I still think that going on the road's an incredibly difficult challenge. Like, I think if you polled all these NFL teams, they'd still rather play at home. And then if you think about it too, I mean, if you're the 2 or the 3 seed there, I mean, you're going to get the 6 or the 7. I mean, it's going to be a lower seeded team anyway than the 4 seed. I think that, I mean, take last year, for example. People thought that Tampa Bay would be an easy matchup, and Tampa Bay, beats Philadelphia, and then they take Detroit down to the wire. Like, I think Dallas is definitely going to sign up for a game at home against like a 6 or 7 seed compared to going on the road and at an NFC South team. That's just what I think there. So, I kind of forgot exactly. Oh, the floor for them. I think that their floor is definitely a winning record, 9-8. It's probably more like 10-7, but just to be a little bit contrarian from you, I'll say 9-8. And I think that they will finish 10-7. I guess that'll be my record for them. 9-8, 10-7. I guess
we're kind of in the same ballpark. Yeah. Okay. I feel all right about that then. Hallway, I hope we answered your question. Moving on to the New York Football Giants of the NFC East. 6-11 last year. Their win total projected over under this year 6.5, pretty much the same. They had one of, if not the worst, supporting casts around the quarterback last year, and you could argue they even had one of the worst quarterback rooms in football last year. it is kind of impressive this team won 6 games, considering how bad it was. Brian Daboll deserves some love, for sure. You can win 6 games with 3 shitty quarterbacks, the worst OL in football, and a not very good defense, not to mention no wide receivers. It's pretty impressive. I mean, Zaquan, gotta help him, lined up as Wildcat how many times over the last few years? I don't blame him for getting out of there, but he is the biggest loss of this team. He's the face of the franchise. You ask most Giants fans over the last 5 years, he's probably their favorite player. This team has a different feel to it this year. I've said that about a couple teams we've covered already, but this one I think really has a different feel than most. I think there's a different sort of air in the building, and the Hard Knocks offseason show that the NFL has been great, and I think it's kind of painted a bad light on the Giants in some ways because they've actually made some great acquisitions. They've really beefed up their OL. They signed maybe 3 starters there. Brian Burns is going to be a legit piece on the defensive side as well as Jalen Mills. Their tight ends are a little unexperienced. That's a big thing there. But Neighbors, Tyler Nubin, who they got in the 2nd round out of Minnesota, I believe, and Drew Phillips, cornerback out of Kentucky. Those are 3 hits in the top 3 rounds of the draft. Nubin and Neighbors especially. Those 2 guys could end up being 2 of the better players to come out of this class. Some folks had Nubin as the best safety on their boards. Some folks had Neighbors as the best receiver on their boards, even with MHJ there. I do think most of the conversation here starts with Daniel Jones. You kind of saw through that documentary we talked about. It's pretty clear at this point that Daniel Jones' own team might not have the most faith or belief in him anymore. And when that comes into question, quarterbacks either respond by proving their worth or by crumbling. And this year is going to be one of the two. Like, I don't think they have another bad season quarterback wise and stick with it for another year. At this point, this is going to be year 6 of Daniel Jones, and he has a combined record of like 20, I think it's 22-34 or something like that, somewhere around there. I might be a couple wins or losses off on either side, but it's not great. I'm going to pull up the official number now. Paul, for you, do you think this team, if Daniel Jones stays healthy for a full year, they're capable of having that better season, or do you think it's still going to have to come with some other caveats to that as well?
No, I think that if Jones stays healthy the whole year, they'll absolutely look better than last year. I think that this team
22-37-1, by the way, is his
22-37
as a starter.
I will say this about the New York Giants. I think if Daniel Jones stays healthy through the course of the whole year, I mean, if misses a game or 2 here and there is what it is, but by and large, if he stays healthy, they will look more like the 2022 version of themselves than the 2023 version. Now, I'm not predicting outright that they're a playoff team and that they go win a wild card game per se, but they are going to look more like, or they're going to be closer, I think, to a playoff team than a bottom feeder like they were last year. I think that this team, it's interesting. I want to save my bold prediction about because it does involve them. I'll save that for the end, but I think that this team right now is going to be around 500.
You can give it to me as your bold prediction if you want to use it now. I'm
okay. And I want to preface this. My official prediction for the New York Giants is that they go 8-9.
Okay.
But my bold prediction, I'll deviate from that. My bold prediction is that they finish 2nd ahead of the Cowboys this year.
Ooh, that is bold. Damn, Paul.
So I know that's like that again. Actual prediction is one thing. If we're going hot take bold prediction, it'll be that the Giants finish 2nd. Look, Daniel Jones did it 2 years ago with not a huge supporting cast. I know he had Saquon Barkley that year, and Barkley was huge. I get it. I have said many times on this podcast already that the young receivers, I believe, will be a big improvement and that they'll start to take a step forward. Malik Neighbors, obviously, I think he'll hit the ground running. And then I think Jalen Hyatt will step up in a big way as well. And last week, we even mentioned a guy like Wan'Dale Robinson, who was solid before, an ACL injury. And then he wasn't back at the beginning of last year. And it took him a little bit of time to get back into the swing of things. I think that there is a legit receiving core for Jones here. And I do agree with you. It's a little bit put up or shut up for him. But again, at least we've seen a little bit of a track record from him. It's not coming completely out of the woodwork with Daniel Jones to have success. So official prediction 8-9. I think that their floor is probably like 6 or 7 wins, probably like 6 wins, roughly like what they did last year. Their ceiling is a wild card playoff win. I'll pick somewhere pretty much smack dab in the middle at 8-9. I think they'll be around 500 and in the playoff hunt for the majority of the season. And then bold prediction is that they find a way to slide up past the Cowboys in the division standings.
Okay, so the last stats I will give on the Giants quarterbacks from last year. I'm not going to count the one game that Daniel Jones started but could not finish last year. In the other games, the Giants went 1-4 with Daniel Jones as their starter. They went 5-7 with everyone else, 2-4 with Tyrod Taylor, and 3-3 with my guy, Tommy DeVito. I'm not here to talk about DeVito, but my point is Daniel Jones isn't 500 in his career as a starter. He's only been once. And the one playoff win they have is over a Kirk Cousins-led team who also famously struggles in the playoffs. I don't think it's a playoff win, yeah, but not all playoff wins are created equal. They're just not. I like your prediction. That to me is kind of their ceiling. Sort of 500 team, fridge wildcard team. If Neighbors is a superstar, then that helps Jones out a good bit because he hasn't really had like a clear one receiver the last few years. Saquon's been the next best thing, and he's been primarily a running back, but they've done a lot of different things with him. But they don't have him anymore. They got to replace him with not just one guy, but it seems like they're planning on doing it with several and kind of mixing those around. I don't really know what that looks like. Maybe it's just Neighbors. Maybe it's a combination of Jalen Hyatt and Singletary as well as some other guys. I think from what I've heard, they're really going to be relying on some of their younger players in other areas as well, not just at receiver, but also at running back and tight end. Like I think it's Tyrone Tracy Jr., Daniel Bellinger. Those guys are going to get reps early and often. Turbo Miller, South Carolina guy they brought in as an undrafted free agent too. Just giving him a quick shout out. I think their floor is more like 3-14, one of the worst teams in the league, kind of in the same ballpark as the Patriots. That's if Jones, again, can't stay healthy or just isn't good. And I think that's a very real possibility. I kind of think their over-under hits it right on the money. I could see them getting 7 wins and overachieving again because they have with Daboll at the helm. I could even see 8 wins, but anything more than that, I'm not trying to be unfair to Giants fans. I just think it's unrealistic to expect. I kind of like your hot take because I think if Dallas struggles, they're well coached. They have a pretty solid D line at the very least. I love bringing in Brian Burns. I think he's going to help that group a lot.
And don't forget sexy Dexter Lawrence.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Can't forget about him either. Or Kayvon Thibodeau on the other side. They could have 3 elite playmakers on the D line when it's all said and done. And that could translate enough to being disruptive and creating extra opportunities for their offense. I'm just not going to rely on it. So for me, I'm leaning more 6-11. I think they're kind of in the same ballpark as the Patriots. If I'm being completely unbiased, I think they have a better chance of having a winning record than the Patriots. But I also think they have a higher chance of things going totally horribly wrong than the Patriots as well this year. I think they're very similar teams in terms of the makeup. Biggest difference is probably just coaching right now because we haven't really seen anything from Mayo. I'm not meaning to compare the two, but in my mind, they're kind of in similar situations this year with the Giants being a little bit of a better roster than the Pats, just not by much. Anything else you want to hit on with the New York Football Giants, Kamish?
Running game will be a little bit of a question mark. We'll see. I mean, Devin Singletary, he's got big shoes to fill there, coming in for Saquon Barkley. So, and it's not just running the football. Obviously, it's catching it too. So that's a huge thing there. I mean, Barkley's so dynamic that you can dump the ball down to him on like a 3rd and 5, and he can pick things up. And he was helpful for DeVito during that stretch too, where Tommy was in there. So forget about that either. So I mean, that's a glaring hole that the Giants need to fill. I think it'll be better in the pass game, but let's see how dynamic their run game is, because I do have question marks about that. One way to mitigate it, Daniel Jones used those legs, baby, and obviously got to stay healthy.
Yeah, at the risk of not being healthy. Wrapping up on the G-men, our friend Dr. Locks, aka Enrico Mastronardi, asks, will Neighbors be a solid number 2 wide receiver for fantasy football? Paul, you're the expert. What do you have to say?
Let me say this. My first knee-jerk reaction is yes. I mean, basically, you're asking him to be a top 25 receiver in a 12-man league to be like a number 2. I mean, maybe top 20 if you're solid. I think yes, he can. I think yes, he will. If he's not, I think that I need to rethink my Giants prediction. I'll say that. I think that he can be that important. He was that talented at LSU. I mean, would Jaden Daniels have won the Heisman without Malik Neighbors? Maybe not. I mean, you have a case to say maybe not taking anything away from Daniels. So that's the type of guy he can be. He can elevate the quarterback that he's playing with. I like solid number 2. I think you're getting into semantics there, but I think when we look at the end of the season, is this guy going to be like a top 24 receiver? So a number 2 and a 12-man. Yeah, I would bet yes. I bet more money on yes than no.
Okay, so Paul's going, what you said, 8-9 as their
8-9.
8-9. I'm going 6-11. A little bit of difference between us, but we're gonna roll with it, guys. Next up, the Philadelphia Eagles. Fly, Eagles, fly. Indeed. 10.5 wins. They're over under for the season. Last year they finished 11-6, and that was after an awful collapse at the end of the year. They started the year 10-1, but they finished 1-5, 1-6 if you include their first round playoff exit to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That slide resulted in the replacement of both their top coordinators from last year. Now it's Kellen Moore calling the shots on offense, previously with the LA Chargers, and Vic Fangio, formerly of the Miami Dolphins, as the new defensive coordinator. Jason Kelce, Fletcher Cox, both no longer with the team. 2 Hall of Famers. See you later. Hassan Reddick, though, joins the unit. DeAndre Swift. Hassan Reddick, also gone. DeAndre Swift, also gone. Kevin Byard, gone. Some other guys. However, Saquon Barkley, huge addition. Bryce Huff, another big addition. Devin White, Devontae Parker, not so much, but I like White there. CJ Gardner-Johnson is another guy. A couple of rookies, Quinyon Mitchell out of Toledo, Cooper DeJean out of Iowa, shoring up that secondary that really struggled at the end of last year.
Mm-hmm.
You sort of talked, Paul, about the Giants overcoming the Cowboys as the number 2 team in the East. It seems like this is your pick to win the division right now. I wouldn't blame you for that by any means. I think their ceiling is higher than Dallas's. It certainly should be. But I think their floor might be lower than Dallas's as well, just based off how we saw them slip and slide a little bit last year. What's your biggest question mark for Philadelphia this season?
I guess I have 2, so to speak, is do those young guys that you mentioned that they got in the draft, do they really fix or at least patch up the holes in the secondary that this team had? Obviously, they were getting gashed through the air last year. And then, I mean, I guess, what does the locker room look like? I mean, are we going to see dissension in the locker room like we saw at the end of the year last year? Who was really responsible for that? I mean, was it the head coach at the end of the day, or was it just the pure fact that they're on a losing streak? I mean, do you eliminate that one? And then do you shore up the holes in your pass defense? If the answers to both of those questions are yes, this is absolutely a Super Bowl caliber team. I mean, that's their ceiling for me. They were here 2 years ago. People forget quickly, but they were legitimately maybe a Jalen Hurts fumble away, or I don't know, a questionable holding call, not being called away from potentially winning the Super Bowl. This Philadelphia Eagles team is good. It's elite. It's legit. It's got a phenomenal wide receiver core. Jalen Hurts needs to look more like the Jalen Hurts he did in 2022 as opposed to last year. I guess that's another big question mark for him there as well. He's got to take better care of the football. But I think that this team is still poised to be the winners of this division and to be one of the biggest threats in the NFC and to Patrick Mahomes to win a Super Bowl. There's just too much talent on this team. I got him at 12-5. I think that their ceiling, if there's some injuries and they drop a couple games, they should maybe 10-7, and they're in a tie with the Cowboys for the division. But I like this team at 12-5 as my official record prediction, with ceiling as a Super Bowl man.
Yeah, I think they are certainly capable of getting to a Super Bowl and maybe winning it as well. They are a Super Bowl contender in my eyes. At least they should be considered as such. And I am very excited to see what Saquon can do with this O-line, with all the skill position talent around him. The field, I bet, is going to feel wide open to him in his first game, his real life game with this team. I think it's going to feel wide open, and I think he's going to take advantage of it. We saw him eclipse 2,000 yards from scrimmage in his rookie season with the Giants. Who's to say he can't do that with Philly, with the best team he's ever played with the best O-line he's ever played with the best quarterback he's ever played with, the best skill position players around him he's ever played with, and maybe, no disrespect to Dayball, the best coach he's ever had, too. The best coaching system he's had. Saquon Barkley could thrive in Kellen Moore's offense. Ground and pound, baby, just like the Cowboys used to be. I am really interested to see how that goes. I think that he provides a lot of value fantasy football-wise. If you are drafting in the middle of the first round, I wouldn't blame you for picking up Saquon before he falls to the second, because I don't think he'll make it to the middle part of the second round by any means. But his ceiling this year is a top 8 fantasy player, maybe even higher, maybe top 6, top 5. It's going to be up there for sure, especially if he's ultra involved in the pass game. The defense, I think, is going to be a little bit better, but it's going to rely on some youth. Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter on the line, Bryce Huff as well, and Vic Fangio is going to have the pressure on his shoulders to sort of patch up the mistakes from last season. Their floor for me is 9-8. I can't see them as a losing record team. Maybe, they struggle with some locker room things like you mentioned and have some rough losses. But even then, I would see them as a wild card team that could still be a contender, be frisky in the playoffs if they get momentum at the right time. This is a very momentum-based team. When they're hot, they're really hot. When they're cold, it's like Antarctica. Ceiling 13-4, top 1 and 2 seed in the NFC, and a possible Super Bowl contender. My official prediction, I'm kind of leaning in that 12-win ballpark. I don't think they'll fully get to their ceiling. 11-12 feels right. It's kind of like a push between them and Dallas for me as the division winner. Ultimately, I lean more Philly, but it's not by much. I really think that there's a chance Dallas is the better coach team between the two, and that ultimately pays dividends at the end of the year.
Interesting. I'm not 100% sure in terms of coaching where I'd rather be. I think McCarthy is solid. I think he gets a bad rap, but then again, I think so does Sirianni because the guy was in the Super Bowl 2 years ago. So I'm not 100% sure. I agree with you that Dallas is so head and shoulders coached better than Philly. But
I don't think it's head and shoulders, but I think there is a little bit of a gap. I think McCarthy's maybe a half tier better. If we went back to our coach draft that we did, I think those two guys were drafted pretty similarly. And if I'm not mistaken, I think McCarthy went first.
Yeah, I think McCarthy went above him. So you might make a fair point there. But I think what can separate, I think at the end of the day, talent's a little bit more important there. It's the guys on the field that actually got to execute. And you mentioned it with Dallas, it gets really rough outside of CeeDee Lamb. Where are the secondary pass catching options?
Yeah.
So many other options here in the Philly offense now. Yeah. You've obviously got Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown. You throw in Dallas Goedert, and now Saquon Barkley, absolutely capable of catching the ball out of the backfield as well at a different pace than a guy like Miles Sanders of years past. Or, DeAndre Swift, I guess, was solid last year as well, but I think Barkley's just even way more dynamic. So you throw that in there, there's a lot of weapons, and then there's multiple guys that can run the ball if you factor in Jalen Hurts.
Here's a question. Let's say San Francisco goes ahead and actually trades away Brandon Ayuk. Does Philly become the best offense in the NFC after the fact?
Yeah, I think that they'd be pretty clear cut. I mean, I'm not 100% sure they're not
Either them or
already.
Detroit, right?
Yeah, Detroit's solid there as well. I think playmakers wise, Philly has more playmakers. I think now with some of the departures on the offensive line, with like Jason Kelsey, for example, I think that Detroit might have the better offensive line, but I think that the playmakers still go to the Lions. I think that there's a little bit higher of a quantity. Like you go St. Brown and Sam Laporta, studs, Jahmyr Gibbs, stud. But you've got two receivers in Philly that can match Gibbs and St. Brown. Now you have the running back in Barkley, and it's like, okay, maybe if Jameson Williams unlocks something, Detroit might have a better set of skill players, but we haven't really seen that quite yet. And so like you still have Goddard there as like the tiebreaker almost. So I guess I would still go Philly over Detroit there. And yeah, if Ayuk leaves San Fran, I think that probably puts them over the edge as well. I mean, you can make the case right now that Philly's a better skill set or set of skill players than San Fran. I think that you'd certainly be met with a fair argument there, considering they got Ayuk, Samuel, and CMC. But good question.
We've got one last team to cover here. Do you have time to do the Commanders before we
Sure
sign
do.
off?
Sure do. I would not miss out on the commies for anything.
The commies. Oh my gosh. Gripped me with that one. The Washington Commanders. 4-13 last year. They're over under this year's 6.5. Paul and I spoke a little bit off camera before we did this. And I think we were both sort of caught off guard by how impressed we were with the work the Commanders did in the offseason. Their team, I know they're over under 6.5, but I think their team's a little bit better than that, at least on paper. They lost the last 8 games of the season last year. Like, they really kind of threw in the towel midway through the season. They didn't care anymore. Ron Rivera gone. Dan Quinn's in now. Cliff Kingsbury's the new OC. Joe Witt Jr. is hired as DC, who was previously the Cowboys defensive pass game coordinator. It's going to be an aggressive secondary. They brought in Jaden Daniels, obviously. They also brought in Biadish, Nick Allegretti, 2 starters on the O-line. They upgraded their defense with Jeremy Chin, with Cleveland Farrell, with Frankie Louvu as well. Those are 3 starters right there. Not to mention Bobby Wagner as well. On the offensive side, they brought in Austin Eckler, Zach Ertz, a couple of veterans who could make things a little bit easier for Daniels, just in terms of showing experience, finding ways to get open. However you feel about Eckler coming off injuries and, potentially being hampered going into this year, I think the expectations are going to be different for him this year than maybe they were previously. I am interested to see how you feel about Washington as well going into this year, Paul. A lot of it is going to depend on Daniels and what kind of quarterback he is coming out of college. I know Commanders fans are really scared about how similar his body type is to Robert Griffin III and, the potential injury risks that could come with that. But I also think there's a lot of excitement in DC right now, maybe more than there has been since, I don't know when, probably since RG3 was there, if we're being honest. And I don't think it's misguided by any means either. I think if Daniels becomes a star, there's a very real chance he ends up having the best season out of the quarterbacks drafted 1, 2, 3 last year. I think there's a chance where he ends up being the rookie of the year out of this crop. Williams would have to struggle a little bit. Things would really have to go right here. Terry McLaurin would have to have a big season too. But I'm kind of liking the vibes here in DC, man. It's really different. New ownership, new coaches, more talent in the room. There's a lot of people there who want to prove themselves, from what Dan Quinn says. And I think they might be able to do that. What that means, is that a playoff season? Probably not, but maybe they're like around 500. I could see them flirting with the winning record. I don't see them getting there, but I think 9-8 and maybe a team competing for a wild card spot is an okay ceiling to have here. Maybe that's my bold prediction. I'm not confident enough to say they'd finish second, in the division. But if you want to say my bold prediction for the NFC East is the Washington Commanders being a wild card team, then throw it on in there.
It's not too crazy. And I don't have them with a great record myself, but what I was going to say, or what I was alluding to off camera that you talked about earlier, was that I think that they will look a lot better than their record actually is this year. I think that that's going to be the biggest takeaway. I don't know if Daniels will hit the ground running per se, but there is some talent here. Jahan Dotson was a solid rookie receiver last year. You have Terry McLaurin, who's obviously well established. You bring in Austin Eckler to be a nice complement along with Brian Robinson, who I like a lot. Like, it's a good running back duo. There is some talent on the defensive side of the ball that you already alluded to. I think that there's enough playmakers here. They can steal a couple wins. They can be a team that pulls off an upset or two here or there. I'm going to say that their ceiling is probably like 8-9 wins, 500. Like, that's absolute. Everything goes their way. Daniels hits the ground running. Like, they stay healthy.
Okay, so yeah, we're on the same page as far as that goes. That makes me feel good.
That's their ceiling. I think that they're probably going to be like 6-11. Okay. But again, I think a team that looks a lot better than a 6-11 team. And one of those teams, like, as they start to get, more experience under them and they get their feet wet with the season a little bit, like a team that a good team like an Eagles or a Cowboys within their own division, or just another high ranking team in the AFC or NFC, like, sees them on the back half of the schedule and is like, this is not the team I want to play right now. And they could play spoiler for a couple people down the stretch. I think that it's going to be linked to how quickly Daniels hits the ground running. I think that's the end all be all, right? I don't see him per se like being regarded as the top rookie in the class over Caleb Williams, just because the supporting cast is not there like it is in Chicago. I'm not saying that it's a bad group of talent and group of weapons that they have in Washington. I just laid out a couple guys that I like, but it's not Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, Roma Dunze with DeAndre Swift as your running back. Okay. Like, Daniels is just not walking into that situation, but he's not walking in there with nothing. Like, it's a lot better of a situation than, no disrespect, than your boy Drake May has in New England. And so for that reason, I think Washington can look solid, but ultimately I still don't think that this is their year yet. But I think that 2025 could be a very, very interesting year down in our nation's capital.
Forget
the New England Patriots. 2025.
No, you're good. You're good. Forget the New England Patriots, though. How about the New York Giants? I think unquestionably Washington has the third best roster talent-wise in this division. I think they have more talent on paper than the Giants do. I don't necessarily know if it will pan out, but if you go position by position, there's more guys who could or probably should be reliable on this team than there is in New York. There's certain areas, there's question marks on both sides. Quarterback, I think there's less question marks at receiver for Washington. I think there's less question marks on the back end of the defense for Washington, but the Giants' D-line is probably better. O-line, it's kind of similar. We'll have to see who improved the most at the end of the year, but I like where these two teams are at currently. I think that Washington has some potential here, and I'm glad you see their ceiling where I see it, which is in the ballpark of 500. Maybe not more than that, probably not competing for the division, but if Jalen Daniels is a superstar and some of these other moves that they've had in terms of personnel and players pay off, this is going to certainly look like a better football team, and it probably should play like a better football team too. At least you would think. I still think their floor is relatively low. Floor I would put around like 4-13. I think they have a slightly higher floor than New York and New England, but it's not by much if things go poorly. Things going poorly meaning Daniels gets hurt, is a bust, or just other aspects of the offense work out. Like, I think there's a world where after this year, they're glad that Terry McLaurin's contract is starting to run out, where they really regret maybe bringing in guys like Ertz and Eckler who have been beat up. But I kind of feel good about those moves by and large. Dotson, you mentioned, I think will be a really important contributor this year. And I think the worst case scenario for this team results in them being in a position to bring in a guy like Luther Burden III or something next year out of the college level. And that could really help this team going forward. They need an edge rusher too. I would say, like, that's their biggest other personnel need I can think of just at face value. And their real tough part about them is not only do they have to play the Cowboys and Eagles twice apiece, the division that they have to play this year, schedule wise, where they play each team from it, is the AFC North. They could very well go 0-8 against in those games. Like they may not win a single game from every single one of those contests if things don't go well. Again, that being Dallas and Philly twice, then Cincy, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, and Cleveland. Like there's a real chance where they go 0-8 in those 8 games.
Maybe so. I think that they'll be able to grab 1 or 2 wins out of there.
Probably. Yeah.
But you do make a fair point. It's not easy, and I don't know where those games are, home and road. But that'll factor into it. But it also depends. I think, like I said, like when are you facing some of those teams? Like, are you getting some of those teams that we perceive to be better later in the year when maybe they're a little bit banged up? And I think Washington could potentially take advantage, or when Washington just has more cohesiveness and they're gelling together better in week 12, 13, 14 than they were in week 3, 4, 5. So I think that'll play a big factor, but I think that it's looking up for Washington. Obviously we got to see what Jaden Daniels actually looks like on the NFL football field. That's a big question mark. Like, I mean, if he flops, they're back to square one, but if he shows promise, it's a similar type thing to what I said with your New England Patriots. I think Daniels is probably going to just be out there sooner than May is. But as long as you see legitimate growth,
he'll be out there week 1 for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
As long as you see legitimate growth from your quarterback throughout the season, wins and losses are kind of immaterial. Like you said it, ceiling for this team might not even be 500 quite yet. They're not going to compete for the division, at least seriously. So just focus on your young guys internally getting better. That's the biggest thing. And your goal and your window will be 25, 26, 27 down the road. And that's the biggest thing for the Commanders.
Okay, awesome. I love it. I'm still sticking with the Commanders being a wild card team as my bold prediction. I'll
Fair enough. And I'll still say Giants over Cowboys in the standings is mine.
That would be wild.
What if both of those things happen? What if Cowboys finish last, Giants beat them in the standings, and Washington's the 2 and they're in the wild card?
I want to know what the odds on that are. I don't think it would happen. The odds would be ridiculous. Division winner. It seems like you're pretty set on the Eagles.
Yeah, I am. I'll go Philly here.
I think it's more of a toss-up. I want to lean Philly, but just to be contrarian, I'll go Dallas. But my gut's telling me Philly.
I get you. I get you. I think Philadelphia does a pretty good job of putting all the noise from last year behind him, and I think Sirianni keeps his job, and I think Philly makes a deep run. I don't know, I got to think about whether I want to actually have them as my Super Bowl team in the NFC. But let me say this, they have a good enough season where Sirianni keeps his job and there's confidence in the regime that they have right now to keep moving forward.
Okay. I feel pretty good about that sentiment. Best fantasy value in the division? Give me 1, maybe 2 guys off the top of your head.
Boy, I don't know. I gotta see exactly where he's going, but I'll probably have to go Rico Dowdle here because I'm just not buying into, let's see. So Rico Dowdle, according to Fantasy Pros, and again, depends on what site you're looking at.
ESPN has him as 50 at the ADP.
50 at the ADP.
For running backs. So 160
among running
overall.
backs.
Yeah.
Among running backs, he's 50. So he's the RB 50 is what that's saying?
Yeah, he's pick 166 overall.
Okay.
Thereabouts.
On here, he's pick 142, RB 44. I think that's phenomenal value here. I mean, this guy stepped up into a larger role last year when he needed to, when Pollard just didn't look quite as effective and, was hurt at times. Let me say this. I don't know if Rico Dowdle is going to go win you your league or anything like that, but I think that this is certainly a guy that you could plug and play at certain points at different times in the season, different weeks, and getting somebody who's going outside of the top 40, almost 50 running backs going and what would this be? If you're in 140 to 150 territory, that's round 12, 13. I mean, who are you really drafting at that point?
Yeah, you're just throwing darts, and this guy very well could be the lead back in Dallas.
Exactly. So, I mean, I like Rico Dowdle here. I mean, I think the offense will still be at least solid. I think that's a great value for him.
I think Devin Singletary is going to be my choice here. running back 36 right now per ESPN's ADP charts. Average pick is right around 120, so like round 10. He's going to be the lead back for this team. Saquon has always gotten the ball just an absurd amount in this offense when he's been there. And yes, there is certainly a talent gap between those two running backs, but somebody's going to have to run the football. And if Daniel Jones is going to play a full season, I don't think it's going to be him. I think it's going to be a lot of Devin Singletary. I think they're going to be feeding him week in, week out. I don't think he's going to have to compete with, what was the name? Dameon Pierce, the other back in Houston last year. He's not going to have to compete with anybody. He's the bell cow from the get-go, in my opinion. And as long as he stays healthy, he could get over 1,000 yards. I don't think he's going to blow the world away or anything, but I think you could see him in the top like half of NFL rushers in terms of like the overall scope of the league. I think he could finish as like RB 16 or higher. I don't think that's unrealistic. Again, I'm not saying he's going to be like, one of the best running backs in the league, but I think there's more value there than what he's initially getting right now. Daniels would be the other guy. If Daniels is a superstar and his rushing ability translates to the NFL, he's going to be like a Lamar-esque type guy with potentially a better arm right out of the gates and better understanding of passing games. That could be really scary for fantasy managers to have to play against if it pans out that way. Those would be my two guys, but I really love your Rico Dowdle choice. That was the first guy I thought of, just being totally transparent.
Nice. I like your picks as well. I think that there's a plethora of guys you could go to on Washington as well. Just we talked about how like what they could look better than they actually are. I mean, I thought Jahan Dotson was a guy that was solid last year at the very least. He's another guy I was definitely thinking about for this sleeper pick. So look out for him. I think a lot of people will turn to Terry McLaurin, but Dotson was solid in the time he had last year, and I think that he could step up into like that, wide receiver, back end wide receiver 2, flex play type role. Could be very solid there.
All right. Well, I don't have anything else to add on the NFC East unless you do, my friend.
Nope. I think we covered it pretty comprehensively here. I am interested to see how this one plays out. I think it could shuffle. I think it'll be interesting. The Commanders are a little bit of a wild card, and then after that, a little bit of a free for all. I think after Philly,
I definitely think there's potential for movement with some teams here. I don't know what that would look like, but I think both of the teams that were in the bottom of this division are going to be better this year, at the very least. All right, this is going to wrap it up for our NFC East preview. Let's hear it one more time for the commish. Happy birthday. Again, this just going to turn this into a birthday weekathon for you, I guess.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Fifth and Long listeners, stay tuned. We will be going through more divisions here as the offseason progresses. Our goal is to try to go one division at a time where you'll be able to enjoy each of those episodes every week, where you're getting multiple episodes a week. We cover a division in each, and maybe some other things. Next up for us is going to be fantasy stayaways. Paul and I are going to have that episode coming at you after this. You'll probably see it a day or so after this one drops. Either way, thank you for tuning in. You can follow us on Instagram at Fifth and Long Pod or Fifth and Long on Twitter. We also have full video episodes available on YouTube now. I'm finally fully embracing the editing grinds. No more laziness, no more excuses. You're going to be able to get your video content from Fifth and Long from here on out, my friends. Just in time for football season as well. Paul, good night. Good luck. Same to you, Fifth and Long fans. We'll catch you back here on the gridiron next time, all right?
God bless, ladies and gentlemen. See you later.